A shift of light. It started with a toad at the Toronto Zoo. Sitting on a vibrant dark green leaf behind the glass of a small enclosure, the size of a small cupboard, I squatted before him as my family and others moved on to larger things that caused murmurs of awe to drift over my head as I stared at the toad. He stared back, unimpressed with his view, but I knew him. A little thing often overlooked, forgotten, misunderstood, something that didn't sparkle for the world to see as he sat in his own little corner to watch a world that didn't care. But I saw him, and he saw me as I looked through the camera lens and realized that here is a patron soul who may understand what it had been like for me, small and quiet, sitting in my corner, avoiding the adults in my life while still yearning to be drawn into the bustle of the world. Click. I captured him. Just once as my kids squealed in delight and called me to another animal that was larger, bolder, a vibrant star that everyone was taking notice of. It started with that toad, but not really. Camera flashes marked the big events. A smiling child that fit into the life she'd been set to. Laughing, happy, eyes sparkling with no worry. Content. But it didn't last. Before I was even 5, violence shattered that contentment and gave me the knowledge, much too young, that life wasn't an abundance of light, it was a shift that kept growing darker with each year. Each film of violence laid over me, dulled the edges of my smile, cast shadows in my eyes, and I found my small corner, turning into it, hoping that the bright flashes of the camera would capture the despair within my eyes. Notice the way my fist remained clenched, my lips tight, finally acknowledging that I, in my turmoil, had been seen. Click, click, click. The light of the flash was blinding until all I could see was the darkness around me. Then I found a camera, was gifted it through a weird chance of fate, and I found a new vantage point, a shift of light. No longer in the center of that blinding violence, turning the lens out into the world, I could see some light bleeding in, making the black first gray and then fading into muted colors for me to display. I found myself gazing at the ocean, my camera in hand as I focused on rocks that had been carved from the land, large boulders reminding me of all the pain my body had entertained. I gazed through the lens, the muted colors not capturing the blue of the sky, as I realized I could swim out past the rocks and allow the Pacific to catch me up into her tendrils and pull me out into her depths. I gazed at the future of darkness before me, aware of the darkness behind, waiting for me at home. Click. I captured her grace, and the urge to swim into her depths, away from everything, was lifted. The camera's viewfinder seeing new vistas that could be so many things beyond what I already knew. And it was like stepping out from a storm where the clouds clutched at the great expanse, but the light begins to trickle down, starting first in the heavens, almost too far to reach its warmth without it touching any of the dark land my feet press against. Then it spread into a fog that was a shift of light, something I could feel against my skin, but wasn't as heavy as the dark film before. And while it might be lonely, there were people there in the fog, willing to help pull me into the warmth of the sunlight. The land was still frozen by the fear that these images were not real, not things I'd seen and felt, but only dreamt about under the dark slide of the film that had covered me before. But I breathed in the cold air and found beauty in the jagged edges left behind by the winter storm that had been my childhood. And frost clung to my world, but it wasn't scary anymore. Instead, it breathed itself into green fields and newness of spring, into something more, into hope. Where dangers didn't lurk in the shadows, but allowed me to marvel at them, and I began to see laughter in the images I captured, and I found new vistas to gaze from as I learned that every image immortalized by my lens was a reminder that even those who've been touched by violence could find such beauty in a moment, a frozen piece of time. My vantage point afforded me the ability to take it in, to celebrate. To have silly moments where laughter shook the camera as I tried to be more serious than my subject. To have hope that I could find serenity in a floating flower, grace in a dancing butterfly, love within a cat's eye. To be something more than all the terrible things that cause jagged edges in me. I found within myself a kaleidoscope of light. Play. But it started with that toad, where I realized that I could be so much more than something small and scared and alone in a little corner. I could be a shift of light.